Hello, and I hope everyone's enjoyed the break for the holidays, Christmas, whatever you're into. So welcome to episode 4 of the Grit podcast, and in this case, it is part two on my factors that influence you getting the girl series. So part 2 is on value, as you can probably see in the title. It's another factor not based on importance, just second arbitrary thing that I've chosen. Value. So value is something which I feel like we all intrinsically understand what value is. Like, we understand everything has a value. So you think of it in economic terms. You have a burger, there's only so much you would pay for that burger. Or there's a car, you probably pay more for that car than you would for a burger. Like, that's the case what it is. But for example, if you were starving in a desert and you're on death's door, and I gave you a car without any petrol or a burger, you probably would be like, well, I'll take the burger. Short term, survival is important. So value is something which I think is important that people realize it changes over time. So your value is not static. Your value is not even static in your day, the people you meet, everything. So your value is going up and down, up and down, up and down. Anyway, so value. Let's start by going over this and splitting it into 3 categories. I've chosen these 3 because I think they feel like they make the most sense to go over. So, what's that phone? The first is internal value, and the second is external value, and then the third, which I'll probably go spend more time on, which is sexual market value. So, let's start with internal value. So, stand on ceremony here. Internal values, quite simply, is how you see yourself. It's how you view yourself, how you feel like you're presenting yourself to the world, and it's a complicated one, because how that actually is in reality, as in your value kind of, as I sort of mentioned earlier, like how your value changes depending on what situation you're in, but your internal value should, in theory, remain a lot more constant. You should be pretty sure of who you are as a person. Like, I know how I feel about myself. I feel pretty good about myself, and then that doesn't change if some guy down the street calls me a fat wanker. I'd probably laugh it off and forget about it in about the next 30 seconds and get on with my life, and my value to myself would still be very similar. So it's important to have a good sense, good self-esteem, a good sense of value for yourself. Firstly, because it strongly affects what you project out in the world. So if you have a strong sense of self, when you're out there communicating with people, speaking to women at work, with your family, etc., and you're coming, it directly reflects how you come off. So if you're coming off as someone who doesn't feel they've got a lot of internal value, you're going to come across as more quiet, your body language is going to be off, and people intrinsically are going to be going, something's a little bit off about this guy. He doesn't quite feel, I'm not seeing the confidence, I'm not seeing the sense of self. And that's something that you'll always need. Something which I actually learned this year is that not everybody has an internal monologue. I always thought that, for me, my sense of value is linked to how I talk to myself. So I talk to myself in my head. There's like a little voice in my head, and it says, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Blah 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 blah." But apparently, not everybody has that. But if you do have that, just look at how are you talking to yourself? How are you viewing yourself? You're like, oh, look, a waste of space, or is it like, come on, mate, sort yourself out? Essentially, being your own best friend, that kind of thing. So, what other sort of factors that can influence your internal value. Well, how you perceive yourself. It will be your experiences. Your experiences are going to be a big factor. If you've had some good experiences previously, it's something you can use as a positive reference point and come back and be like, well, I've done this in the past, so I can do it again. So you have a positive look at yourself. If you were looking at yourself like those two-way mirrors that you see in like police stations, you'd be looking at yourself and going, that guy's a confident guy. If you're high in self-esteem and value, and you see yourself highly, you will have a lot of respect for yourself. That will translate into like having stronger boundaries and stronger frame. So something which we talk about in those core principles, having frame. If you have strong internal value, you think, yeah, I'm valuable, you are more likely to sit around like, all right, well, someone's trying to get into that and do something which I don't like. No, well, I don't need that person. I don't need that experience with that person or whatever it is. And then that's how you hold that strong energy and keep that sense of self. Remember, you're making yourself your own mental point of origin. Is very important. It's very important for boundary setting as well. Just like, you say, I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to take that. I know what I'm worth. I'm not having that. So if you look around as well in the world at the moment, that is something which, the feminist movement is really pushing for women. It's just like saying no and having like no, I'm worth more. You go queen, all that kind of stuff. That's what they're trying to do, is pump up women's internal value, because women traditionally don't have that same level of internal or self-esteem that men do. So I think it's probably like a biological thing. I'm not going to theorize why, but if I'm going to spitball, I might spitball for a second actually. Why not? It's probably to do with the fact. Actually, no, I won't touch it. Not touching that yet. Anyway, yeah. So as I said earlier, as cringe as it sounds, you have to be your own best friend. You have to be the person that you can rely on in the world. That, if you say you're going to do something, you can back yourself. You make promises to yourself rarely, but when you do, you're doing it right. And then kind of the last thing I'm going to touch on internal value is that your internal value should just not be influenced by the way other people are treating you. So once you have that sense of self, and you build that up over time, it's going to be turning into this impregnable fortress. Like, unless something major happens, like even if you lose your job, you still want to have that self-esteem. Like, okay, I can get another one. Or, you have a breakup, you go, I'm sad, spend a few days grieving that relationship. And then you can, start your life again and move on and keep going. So whilst, you are obviously human and the comparison is inevitable, like it's, you don't let it consume you, and you just sort of glide through the world feeling, confident, whatever, and having a good self-esteem. Funnily enough, this year, I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast already, maybe I have, maybe I haven't. Some girl that I met, we've known each other for socially for, I don't know, good 10 years now. And she said, oh, you are the most confident person I've ever met. and I thought that was funny, because I don't really see myself as confident. I just see myself as, just someone who, I know what I am, I know what I want, and I just live that way. I just completely embody that. And I know she just picked straight up on it. She was like, wow, and then we were having a very actually quite blunt, fourth wall breaking conversation about dating and everything, and it was very interesting just to see how she viewed things about me based on just my my internal sense of self, my self-esteem. That was it. Yeah. Anyway, so next we are moving on to external value. External value, I was trying not to relate it in terms of women because that's more sexual market value, but your external value is, I think, best summed up by the question, what is your utility? Like, there is a great essay out there, I can't remember who wrote it now, I don't think I'll find it, but it's kind of like, being nice is useless in the world, what is your utility? Like, if someone's there dying, bleeding out on the street, and you come up and say, oh, I'm very nice, and they're gonna go, well, great, but can you help save this person's life? You see this a lot at work as well. If you've worked in corporate environments, you see some people who are very nice are not necessarily the most useful person in the workplace. They're pretty useless, but because they're nice, then maybe they're kept around longer than someone who was not nice and not useful. So, like, there's a bit of like a matrix there to work out what happens, but it's so then the question is it better to be useful or nice? Well, I'd say probably both in the world, but if you're going to choose one, probably better to be useful, because useful people, they're always going to be around, because if you're not, and you'll always be in demand if you're useful. Yeah, but especially if you're highly skilled in something quite niche, at that point you can really start to dictate your price. So that's, to go back to free market economics, if there's high demand for something and low supply, that price is skyrocketing. So it's all about price inelasticity. You can read more into economics if you like. I'm not gonna go into it here and embarrass myself. But as we were mentioning earlier about the cheeseburger or the burger, a burger when you're starving, hungry, is worth way more than it is when you've just been out to a dinner party and you've eaten, you fill, and then someone goes outside and offers you a cheeseburger, and if they offered it you for like 10p, you probably wouldn't take it then, because it's not worth it to you. But that same burger, if you haven't eaten for all day and you've famished, and they said here's 10, I want that same burger that they were selling you yesterday for 10p, for £10, you probably would buy it, even if it's a day old. That's kind of what value is. So remember that it changes, and in other ways you can affect it by learning the ways that value changes. So what I guess the next thing you need to look at is, how is value measured? So value, I guess, can be measured in how useful you are in terms of your skills, entertainment, labor, your energy, output. And that's the important thing, is the kind of output. So what are you bringing to the situation? What are you bringing to the party? And then, a lot of people out there, what you'll notice, especially in the world, is this is just more of a advice. So if you're looking out there, you're thinking, a lot of people who do not bring a lot to the party start to, they shout the loudest and, point the fingers to other people. But then, if you turn around and say, hold on a second, what is your utility here in this situation? That's where these are questions you need to be asking. And it's kind of interesting because there are some protections, set up in society. You have like unions and stuff like that, and social alliances that kind of push that question, what is your utility, to more the background. So let's say you're running a big business, and I live in the UK at the moment, and there's train strikes every week and whatever, and these unions are able to provide protection for workers and say, basically pump up their value and say, well, you can't fire these people and replace them because they're part of a union. So they won't be valued at X amount annual salary or whatever. So you give them that, or or they're not going to work, and it's an interesting little little dichotomy there, and there's a lot more to it, but it's not what this podcast is about. So personally, I see like external value as like a bit of an annoyance, like because in my head I think, oh, I'm worth this much, and then you go into a new situation and you realize, oh, your worth is not as much, and you might have to prove yourself or whatever, and it's like as much as if you live a certain life, in the standard, you know, world where you have a boss, you have family commitments, all those stuff, which I actually recommend you eventually release yourself from those shackles. What happens is you have to care what your boss thinks about you, but you don't necessarily have to care what a random person on the street thinks about you. Like these are the things where it's like, and then the problem what can happen is if you get a bit more like myself, or you start getting to your mindset, you start looking at the world and going, I don't care what anyone thinks about me. Like I really kind of don't. And this is kind of here now, like what I'm going through at the moment, where I'm like slowly starting to release those shackles of like years and years of conditioning of caring what people think. Like obviously that's the reason why like my face isn't out here at the moment, because it's not. That's because I care what people think, but it's like, well, what about this? What about that? Like financially and things, and because of the content of it. But eventually, once I sort of think my way out of that, it will be a different situation. And then just last one quickly on the point on external value is, how to spot it. Usually signs are financial, cars, homes, big Instagram following. Some stuff is tangible, some stuff isn't. I think it's personally just like a bit of a trap. Like you see a lot of people just kind of pump up their external value, and the problem is, it's like building your house on sand. Like once that one big wave comes across, and everything's just falls down. So you got to think of your internal value as your foundations, and that should be the foundations, and then everything else can build off that. But if you don't have that internal foundation, forget it. So don't be like one of these people, they've built their life, they've got, because this thing I always find as well, like with these, especially these influencers online and stuff like that, they kind of build up this world, and you can kind of see they're kind of insecure about it, and this is they're making content or whatever, but then there's a fear of losing it, or like, oh gosh, if I lose it, what's everyone going to think about me, like all that kind of stuff. And it's an interesting juggle, because I think that's the fear that's pushing them. I really do. I think when people are fearing what people will think about them, that's probably when they do like their best work, because they have that little person looking, chasing behind, going, oh, you're not good enough, so I've got to do more. And then when you have that high sense of self-esteem, you're probably not even caring about that as much, which is probably why, like, you see a lot of people in like strong social media followings are essentially quite vain, and you see a lot of what I call mental illness, like where they can't really control themselves, like mentally they don't have that strong solid foundation, because they have that constant strive just to be better, because they're worried about what people think about them. And essentially you just need to not worry what people think about you. Do what you want to do what makes you happy. Okay, so next we are moving on to part 3, which is your sexual market value. As far as I'm aware, there's a lot out there on sexual market value. I do know, obviously, Rollo's got his famous chart of how sexual market value changes over time. I was better at doing these YouTube videos. I'll put it up right now. But what that essentially says is, women when they're younger, their SMV is much higher. And the SMV peaks around 20. I think Roller has it down as 23, and then the comparative SMV, which is 30, which is he puts down as 5. So my age now, 30, I am a 5 out of 10, and then men peak at 38. And then I think he did like another one where the pink, the woman that was just constantly peaking, something like that. They, women believe that they will peak forever, but I think we all intrinsically know that that's probably a little crazy in reality. So your sexual market value is simply just your value on the sexual marketplace. Just like all other kinds of value, it changes in time. I think, guys read a lot. Like, they'll read this chart from Rollo and I'll be like, oh, as a man, my sexual market value will peak at 38 years old. Fantastic. And then what they do is they sit around until they get to 38, and it's got a point where they've got nothing to show for it. They're a bit of a slob, they're out of shape and whatever. No, that's not what this means. This means if you absolutely take care of yourself, make all the right movements in your 20s and your early 30s, then when you get to 38 years old, you will be able to sit back and have more of a pick of the market than you would have had when you were 22, for example. Like, I definitely noticed a big difference. I was in a relationship actually from like 25 until I was like 28, I think 28, 29, and I noticed a big difference from coming out, from going into that relationship versus going out of that relationship, based on just how easy it was to just capitalize on that. Also, I think it was coming out of COVID as well, so there might be a little bit of a skew things. But yeah, your 20s are there to absolutely just work on yourself and maximize your peak. So you need to work on all those factors, your looks, your finances, just your general energy and aura and all that kind of thing. I can't put enough emphasis on it, that just because you're turning a certain age doesn't mean it's going to change you. You're going to suddenly be like, oh yeah, all the chicks are going to start throwing themselves in you. They won't. They really, really won't. They don't care about that. You have to have that value. So all it is because the reason why 38 is there is because that's when a guy has, in theory, had enough time to build up the resources, the social intuitivity, that's even a word, all those kind of, and the status to finally actually make the most of it. Like, things that happen at 38 for other guys, if you've really locked out in life, you can do that at 25. There's no reason why a 25-year-old guy, especially if you're like a celebrity, you don't really actually peak. Do you know what I mean? There's a reason why that can't happen. But yeah, I actually think men peak a little bit earlier than 38. I think it's more like 34, 35. I think that's probably I call it the hot zone for just being able to be a bit more, when you move to 32 to 35, just being completely young enough to go out there, especially if you're looking just to go out and not, pump up your notch count. That's prime time for that. I think 38, yeah, if you're looking for a wife and looking for servitude, I think that's probably where it drops off actually, because after that women probably figure out this person's not looking for marriage, so they're not as valuable, whatever, doesn't really matter. So the things you should be working on when you're younger are just going to be directly influencing what's going to be happening when you're in your late 30s. I think another important thing just to kind of really beat the point home for guys is that, you know, the sexual marketplace, your sexual market value, it is a zero-sum game. So what that means is if someone else is winning, you are directly losing. Let's put it into simple terms in a nightclub. So you go to a nightclub and, you know, there's what I would probably say usually there's not more than 10 or 15 eligible women in there. And then there's usually more guys, it depends where you go, but let's say there's 10 or 15 eligible women and then there's 20 eligible guys. There's a zero-sum game. So let's say then those 15 girls are taken up by 15 guys. There's 5 guys who are missing out and having to slum it, or they're going home alone, or whatever. It's quite a simple equation that you need to realise that you are competing against every other man in the sexual marketplace. So that means you need to be better than them. You need to be working harder than them on things. You need to be in the gym. You need to be trying to earn that money. You need to be doing all those things if you want to compete on the sexual marketplace. It is a competition, essentially. That's all it is. It's just like human beings have been competing for thousands and thousands of years, or over those millennia, like those, you know, since we've been single cells. It's just been a different way to beat the competition, other males. That's why you have like sexual dichotomy. That's why men are bigger than women physically, because for men it was advantageous to be bigger than women so they can beat off other men. Sorry, because I was childish. They could fight off other men, beat off other men. Yeah, you never know. And end up. Exactly, just that kind of thing. So it is a competition, and your sexual market value is, again, interesting because it will change over time, but also over location. So like you see lots of like especially Western men going over to like Thailand with their big beer guts, going over there thinking they can snare themselves a young Thai hottie, which usually they'll probably get like a better looking woman over there because like, you know, like white men seem more like, you know, gods over there and or whatever, and then they go over there and they flaunt their money around a bit more, and you have a lot more of like a transactional situation, which kind of works for both parties, I guess. And that's kind of all sexual marketplaces is, like what, you know, what works for you has to be working for her as well. So if she wants a bit more money, financial security, and you want a better looking woman, it, you know what I mean, like people, society looks down on it, but it's a mutual benefit. Like it's got gold diggers are gold diggers, but men also want hot women. It is what it is. Like I think it's just because like people have looked down on gold diggers. They just want the money. It's like, yeah, men just want her for her pretty looks as well. He wouldn't be looking at her if she wasn't, you know, worth looking at, kind of thing. And women are savvy to that, and you have to be savvy to that as well. Yeah. So just going back to that zero-sum game thing, just remember, like, if you're not winning, you are losing. Like, I don't know how to say this, but I know that in my life, like, whilst I was talking about, like, I've got like 3 main girls I'm seeing, but I've also got like a bunch of other chicks that I have in my wider rotation who I'm pretty sure, well, obviously you never know, someone's exclusive to you, but like they are from what they're saying. So and some of these girls were abroad or whatever, so like I think overall, like in my whole like sphere of influence, we're looking at like it's like 7 or 8 chicks, which I've essentially just taken out of the sexual marketplace. So that's in various locations. So that's me, one man, taking out 8. That's that's then someone out there in those places where those trying to date those women are losing, because I know they're telling me like, oh, this guy, he wants me out, and blah blah blah, he's trying it on me, blah blah blah, and occasionally they'll do that kind of thing just to see if I react, and I'm just like, oh, okay, whatever, like, I know you're not going anywhere, like, I thought I'd tell they're not going anywhere, because then, I wouldn't say why, but, after a while you realise, yeah, you're bloody obsessed with me, so it's fine. So yeah, it won't change until it gets better. Like, you're in direct competition with guys like myself, and guys that do way better than myself, and you're even in a competition with the famous guy. Like, while you know you're not competing over the same girls, like, you're in a sort of a weird drip-free competition. So what happens is, like, you got like the men at the top of the tree who are like, celebrities, guys that women like don't even have to like pursue women are like jumping them every day. So then you got like guys of like the level below that, they're like then having to pick up their scraps. Everyone's basically bottom feeding off everyone else. But what happens at a certain level is there's a tier of men which women just won't touch, and then what they do is then they complain, oh, all guys are just jerks because they just want to shag you and leave you. So what's happening there is these women are basically saying, like, this bottom percentage of men in society, I'm not even bothered about them. They don't even count. Like, you realise that they don't even count. And then you have the guys in like the middle tier, which were they're trying to bang, and then maybe they might get the odd bang, but these men don't want them long term. They're the ones that are like trying to shuffle them into their apartment unseen, because they're a bit gross, and there's no chance they'll be seen out on a date with them because it's just a weird thing. Which brings me on to sexual marketplace, which it's not social marketplace, social matching theory, which I think Rollo does talk about again. We all intrinsically know that, like, 10s go with 10s and 8s go with 8s, blah blah blah, and there's some like shuffling around laps. So someone's reaching and someone's usually dropping their standards a little bit. And I suppose what game is in this whole thing is, like, we're trying to get to the point where, like, we're not having to dumpster dive so much, so to say, and you can reach a tier higher. So, like, it's really complicated, this whole thing about what you, it's not really what you should want, it's more like what you do want. Like, I think if you're looking for like shorter term flings, you want to be looking at someone who's probably definitely a point higher than you, or a couple of points higher than you. But that just makes it difficult, because then you're fighting for it. But you will realise over time that everyone's kind of doing the same thing. So that's why, like, if you're a guy and you haven't looked after yourself, like, these women are just not going to look at you. They're going to look at you and go, well, they are going to look at you and look straight through you and go, oh, this guy, get out of my face. Like, they might even have a nice conversation with you. They might even be your friend. They might even, might not even sleep in the bed with you, but they're not going to, don't touch her. Don't you bloody dare. But it's something we all intrinsically understand. We know what's up, which is fantastic. But not everyone has to accept it. Like, game can definitely kind of jump you up a few other levels to places where you won't have to go. If you're a bit more verbally verbose and a bit more tactical, you can get a bit more than you would normally. But I think that's not necessarily going to be a long-term solution, because the longer term it is, the more you need going for you. Like, your value, sexual market value, is going to have to be more than just a bit of chat if you're going to be wanting to do something longer term. But if you're looking for a shorter term fling, yeah, sure, because all you got to do is just get her a bit horny, and then some good logistics and whatever, and you can verbally bamboozle someone for like an hour or two, and then next thing you've kicked that one off, and you're done. So what are some ways you can, I don't want to say hacks, like, with your sexual market value, as we're talking about these guys who go out to Thailand, all they're doing is just making use of the economic theory of arbitrage. Nothing really different. Just like the gold salesmen who used to take gold from India back to Europe, where they could sell it at a higher price. Realized, oh, hold on, gold's not that valuable in India. If I mine a bit, take it over to Europe, I can sell it at a much higher price. You can probably do that with yourself. Like, depending on what your value is around the world, you can export that. So yeah, you might not necessarily have like full control of the market in those places, but you can then have more control of like the smaller market that you do have. So like I'm sure these guys who have the big beer bellies, the Germans, the Americans, the Brits going out to Thailand or Cambodia, whatever, they're sure there's particular bars that they go to, and they sit in those bars, just sitting down, waiting for some pretty girls come up to them and say, yeah, you know what, I'm down for this. It's quite interesting. So what you then need to do is work out where you're a bit more shiny, a bit more special. So, for example, I'm a black guy in London. Not really that interesting, not really that special. If I was to go to somewhere else, maybe some other parts of Europe, definitely a bit more interesting. I've noticed that, like, there's definitely more interest in other locations, places where you can go and you just say, you just get a bit more like, oh, okay, people are a bit more receptive. So I guess that's what that is. There is, you got to be a bit more adventurous about what you want to do, especially looking for short-term hookups. It's a good fun. Again, that kind of life is it's in the short term, and if you're looking for something more long term, then that's not like a viable option, unless you're gonna then move your whole life out to that place, and then there's costs and there's costs to that, of course. Moving your whole life out to another location just to take advantage of the sexual marketplace, probably wouldn't recommend that. Unless you can work remotely and you don't really have ties to your home country for whatever reason. So, apologies. So what is the takeaway from value? Takeaways are your internal value should kind of be ruling everything, in a sense that you have strong self-esteem. If you don't have that, you need to work on that more than anything else. And then second thing is, you need to make yourself at least reasonably useful in the world. That's how you make your money. And then in terms of your sexual market value, if you're in your 20s, it doesn't matter how old you are, like, it's never too late. You just need to keep working on making yourself a better person, and that is how you maximize your sexual market value, not just by ticking over days on the calendar. That's useless. This doesn't mean anything. So guys, go out there, be like those gold salesmen from India. Go no, I'm joking. So just go out there and make sure you're putting your best foot forward, and people do respond to you. As I said, I have like a lot of confidence in myself, and I know that when I go to any venue, people will respond to me. I know it. It's just like, whatever, I'm not bothered. It doesn't really, I'm not thinking, oh no, what's gonna happen? Or is she gonna like me? I know that if I like someone, I'm gonna talk to them like this, I'm gonna get a good response. That's because my internal value is so bloody strong that, like, whatever external value of the place of the venue, I can just overcome that. And they kind of think, oh, what's this about? Like, oh, whatever. Like, it was very, very interesting. So, thank you very much. I think, I'm gonna leave it there. I think so. That's just been part 2 of the factors which I think are most influencing you getting the woman. I think next is energy. Not completely sure, but hopefully that should be up before New Year. I think Oops, what day is it today? Okay, yeah, hopefully I get that up before the year is out. But until then, take care. Bye.